Hello and welcome to the Battlefront studio. I'm here with my friend and colleague Phil, who has just finished Fortress Europe. Phil, how does it feel?
Wonderful. It's great having another book out.
Great. And we're going to answer some questions from the community about Fortress Europe. So if you could just hold the book for a second. Jiří Toman asks, does it feel good holding Fortress Europe?
It does indeed. It's always great to have a new book out.
All right, well there you go, that's the answer to your question. And Robert Blomkamp, in the same vein, just wants to know off the bat what you're most excited to play out of the book.
That's a hard one. Let's see. Starting from the front of the contents, an M4 Sherman tank company, an M4 Stuart tank company. I love them all.
Okay. There's nothing that jumps out at you off the top of your head that you want to run with immediately?
Well, getting my British late war forces on the table will always be great, but in terms of doing new stuff, too many things I haven't chosen yet.
Fantastic. So we'll start with just the general gist of what FE is. So there's a series of questions from the Facebook page that are interested in the broad strokes. Is it going to be a forces book or a rules book? Is it similar to the other V4 content, or is it more transitionary? Is it purely to convert mid-war to late war? Can you just give me the gist of what Fortress Europe is?
Right, so Fortress Europe isn't a rule book. There will be a reprinted late war rule book, which is essentially the same as the existing mid-war one. It's a reprint that looks more late war-ish, but that's pretty much all of it. But this is pretty much a force book, as you'd expect. And so in that degree, it's more like the mid-war force books. The difference is that this has got lots and lots and lots of stuff packed into it. So it's got less background and so forth. It's here to get you into late war in one quick, easy, simple book.
And it covers?
It covers the Americans, the Germans, the British and the Soviets.
Okay, fantastic. And
all the big four.
The big four, exactly. And so Nicholas Gunter asks, will much of the medium war, well, I assume he means mid-war, product carry over into late war as well with us?
A lot of it. It depends on who you are. Yeah. If you're a Soviet player, almost everything you've got. If you are an American player, the Grant is obsolete, the Lee, sorry, the Americans call it the Lee, the M3 Lee is obsolete, but just about everything else you've got carries over. If you're a German player, anything from Ghost Panzers carries over. If you're earlier than that, you might have to proxy stuff as later. So your Panzer IVs become late Panzer IVs, your Panzer IIIs become late Panzer IIIs, but you can still use them.
Same thing?
Yep. If you're British, a little more problematic because the British in mid-war have a lot of unique mid-war stuff like Crusaders and so forth. By this period, they're pretty much Shermans, Churchills, your infantry can carry over. But you're in more of a problem there. Right,
because those
they're just long gone.
No use anymore.
Yep.
And we actually have an article to accompany this that has the handful of extra little bits you can add to bring your Panzerfausts and Piats and things to bring all your mid-war guys up with just an extra 2 bases of anti-tank weapons too. So it's a very painless conversion.
Yep.
And then the next question from Gunnar Sorum asks, when you're transitioning over, is that about adding new options, or is a lot of it about point rebalancing to make things look or reflect the late war period a bit better?
It's mostly just taking the same organizations or adjusting them slightly where they'd historically changed over that sort of period. And adjusting the points. The big difference between mid-war and late war is in the points of armor and guns.
Right.
So your infantry pretty much remains flat on the same level, but things sort of drift down in their ratings. So an American Sherman in mid-war is a pretty good tank. Its armor is fairly hard to penetrate, its gun will penetrate most things and so forth. By the late war, it's getting down there quite on the thing. So it's more in the position, a bit higher than a Stuart, M3 Stuart,
in the
mid-war. But it's sort of, now it's a bottom tier medium tank rather than a top tier medium tank. Likewise, the Panzer IV, the late Panzer IV and Ghost Panzer that's really sort of up there, it's pretty hot, is dropped down to fairly low. The Tiger has come from, wow, I got a Tiger, down to, it's a pretty good tank. But
we can kill it.
Yeah.
It can be done. Tristan Scott Jacobs, can we field these lists at varying skill levels, or are they set just to the one?
Fortress Europe is an introductory book, so it's basically got one of everything in it, except for the Soviets who have hero and normal troops.
Right.
That's basically so that we can fit it in a mere, what's this come to? About 120 pages.
Right.
And a decent price. The variations come in the D-Day books and the subsequent books.
And the Soviets have all that extra stuff because they did have hero groups of guys
And also because basically if you've seen the release plan, the release plan is going to go American, German, British, Soviet. And so with the longest time to wait, we've put the most stuff for them in here.
Fantastic. And there are a lot of options. Off the top of your head, how many Soviet options are there? There'd be, let's look at the content.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 formations and a huge pile of
support options.
It's the biggest section in the book by a huge margin.
Benny Christensen, will Fortress Europe be compatible with future releases as the German book has been in mid-war? I assume he means that you could use Africa Corps with Iron Cross, etc. Is Fortress Europe going to have a space in the late war range?
What you're going to see is a lot of the cards out of Fortress Europe will be repeated exactly. They'll be the same card again in D-Day American or D-Day German or something. So when you see a SD Cavs 251 half-track card, that literal same card will carry forward because it will be the same. Likewise for the Americans or the British, a rifle platoon will be the same, a mortar platoon, a universal carrier platoon. So yeah, if you buy this, you will have stuff that will be identical moving on. Of course, there'll also be variations. So your American Sherman platoon can also become a veteran American Sherman platoon later. Okay.
So I guess that ties in good to Lucas Helene Watson's question, which is essentially, will the Fortress Europe lists or the contents in Fortress Europe still be good to use once, say, D-Day German comes out? Is there any reason I'd want to crack out a Fortress Europe German list after that point?
Yes, there is. Let's take Fortress Europe German lists for a specific example. So, where it's the Americans, we'll go...
Germans second.
Germans are second in the list. Okay, so we've got here, the Germans have got the Panzer III and Panzer IV mixed tank company. So this is something that was unique to the changeover period in the winter and spring of 1944.
Right.
After that, the Panzer IIIs had pretty much ceased to exist in the German army. So we're never going to do a Panzer III, Panzer IV mixed tank company before.
Right.
So if you want to do that, this is the book to go to.
And why might you do that? For what?
You have Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs and love your Panzer IIIs.
Right.
I mean, your Panzer IVs will wander forward. But if you want to keep Panzer IIIs, you want to keep some of the weirdities they had at that point, like Flame Panzer IIIs, they were pretty much gone by March.
Right.
So again, they're not going to come forward. Other things that are not going to come forward is the, in the same form, is the Churchill Armoured Squadron. That's why it's called an Italy Armoured Squadron. In Italy, the Churchills were different, older models and differently organised from they were in Northwest Europe. So the D-Day British book will have a different armoured squadron.
Right.
So if you want the Italy-style Churchills, this is the place to go.
Fantastic. So you do get some theatre-specific stuff, because Fortress Europe does sort of cover that, or cover a part of that Italian campaign as it was in 1944. Yeah,
the British stuff in here is sort of a crossover through Italy and some D-Day-ish stuff. As I said, the British are a bit difficult in this book because they underwent quite a transition. And with their models available in mid-war, is sort of mostly it fits more in Italy than it does in D-Day.
All right. Ryan Paul, asks you, will any nations have special rules that only exist in Fortress Europe?
Pretty sure the answer is no. I can't see any reason why they would, and I can't think of any that would, so I'll say no for the moment.
Right, okay. Someone can find that out on launch day. And Christian Kenneth Lingvald wants to know, will the new Fortress Europe book negate the old Late War books for V4 tournament purposes?
Yes. The old books are all V3 books that you can use with the old conversion rulebook, and basically they're just not properly compatible with version 4. So the point spaces is completely different. All of the equipment has been revamped, so its movement rates, in some cases armor rates, the weapons and things have all been updated. The old books, that's based on stuff we were doing 15 years ago.
Yep.
And this has brought everything nicely up to date.
Fantastic. So we'll move on to sort of the focus of this release. Sort of get down into the nitty-gritty, as it were. Doug Hart would like to know, what kind of points are we looking at for standard games?
100 points.
100 points, exactly.
Yep.
That's
give or take. I mean, I can't remember what the plan is for the coming year's tournaments, but if you're thinking around 100 points, you're going to be in the right sort of margin.
That's where the game
is
runs
currently
best?
balanced
best.
Okay. I mean, 50-point games will work, 200-point games will work, but if you're going to sort of have a throwdown game at the club for an hour or two, then 100 points is a good number.
Cool. Carlos A. Sanchez, will I be able to field more big cats like Tiger 2s and 1s without them taking up 2/3 of my force? I assume it means points value there.
Yep. As I mentioned earlier, what's a mid-war Tiger is 29 points?
Yes.
Yep. Tigers in here are 12 points.
Right.
And that reflects their moving down the hierarchy. In mid-war, there's not much that can hurt them. They're just the kings of the table. When you start getting a lot more 76s for the Americans, 17-pounders for the British, 85 millimeters and 122s for the Russians, and of course the Germans themselves have got a lot more big guns.
Yep.
The Tiger has no longer king of the table. As they were told the crews around the beginning of 1944, you've got to stop pretending that you're Superman and start thinking you're actually tanks.
Yes. That's not to say that they're slouchers now.
Oh, no, they're still worth their points.
Right, they can still put down some hurt.
Yeah, you just get a few more of them to reflect their need to be a little bit more clever.
But Tiger 2's not in Fortress Europe?
No, this book isn't about introducing new kit. The British get their 17-pounder Fireflies and 17-pounder M10s, partly because, as I said, they're quite late down the show, and it gives them some of this new higher anti-tank stuff that they're going to see later, and partly just because otherwise there's so little that really does carry over, so give them a little bit of a boost. But this book isn't about introducing new stuff. Oh, apart from the T-34-85 is another new one.
Okay.
The Soviets get that one as well, for much the same reason. They're going to be waiting a while for a lot of new stuff.
So actually, just to bounce back to the what is FE, a good way to think of it is that it's, as much as being a transitionary, historically speaking, book, it's also good for making sure everybody has something that will be useful in-game until they get their own book. Because if we were running this purely from the dates between the brackets, the British might not have a lot of guns to do anything.
Yeah. Yes, so it's a combination of giving a historical transition, a modelling or a gaming transition from mid-war to late war, and giving everybody somewhere to start.
Right.
So if you're a new player and you, at the moment, of course, this is going to be all you get, but in a month you're going to have an American book, and in 2 months you'll have a German book, and so forth. But particularly if you want to play British or Soviets, then this will get you through until you get your own book. Fantastic.
Biana Zomerland Hansen wants to know if late war is going to have more of a focus on tanks.
No. It's not going to have less of a focus on tanks.
Okay. A
lot of people think that there's a focus on tanks or there's not a focus on tanks or something. Yes. The goal is to have all forces viable and equal. Now, that varies depending on location and people's playing styles and so forth. Some areas have different styles and things, but in playtesting, we've at least found across the playtest groups we have across the world that by and large, all of the forces are fairly equal in their capabilities. Tank forces, infantry forces, mixed forces, etc.
Now that still means that some forces aren't as crash hot against other specific forces. There's still things that'll wipe the floor with one another.
Yes, if you build a force designed specifically to destroy infantry, and then your opponent brings no infantry and just tanks, you might have problems.
Then maybe you should have had more of a focus on tanks.
Yes.
So that'll be fine. That'll be fine. Dmitry Akhmenov, what is the balance that Battlefront is aiming for with Fortress Europe as compared with mid-war?
Our balance has always been to have every force have a role in the game, and for players to be able to just go, I love this. Take whatever force, floats their boat, rings their bell, whatever you want, and against somebody with another randomly chosen force or specifically chosen force or whatever, unless it's a killer force against their force, with equal skill and a bit of learning how their force works, they should be able to have a good win-loss ratio.
Have a good crack at it.
Yeah.
So that just sort of ties in quite nicely to this question from Asen Svetkov, who asks, is the equal cost of a Sherman, a Mark IV Churchill, and an M10 due to balancing?
Not sure what you mean due to balancing, but all the points are essentially due to balancing.
Yes.
Trying to make it so that when you put them all together in a force, that your forces will be equal. Now, that doesn't mean that any individual things are balanced against anything else. So if you put Churchills against Tigers, then no, it won't look very balanced.
Right, yes.
Because the Churchills will have great difficulty hitting the Tigers. But if you put a force with Churchills against a force with Tigers, then on average, you're likely to find a balance. Or more importantly, if you take a force with Churchills to the club or to a tournament, and you take a force with Tigers to a club or a tournament against a wide variety of opponents, both should be equally successful. Even against each other they might not be, but against a wide variety they will be.
So that's also part of looking at possibly a good opportunity just to deliver a little bit of info on balancing. It's not, strictly speaking, how good is this tank versus a tank of an equivalent role for the other army. It's also about finding where that tank is likely to exist within all the options of a particular army and saying, if I'm going to take Churchills, I'm probably going to take them with a lot of X unit, and looking at how to balance it that way.
Yeah, when the playtesters are playing games and we look at, well, is X balanced? The question often comes up. Then the thing to do is look through all the games where this occurred. So every game in which Churchill tanks were taken. And the games which Churchill tanks were taken, were there a lot of wins and losses? Was it balanced and so forth? And if there appears to be some interesting patterns in there, it's like, so when Churchills were taken with this, or when this was done, or whatever, and then go deeper into that and try and find out what's going on and just adjust things until they're right. But the goal is that forces with Churchills in them and forces without Churchills in them both will be equal.
But it's not getting it to a point where it's a 50-50 coin flip on whether your force with Churchills wins, because you should see a list that's got Churchills and something else and go, oh, that should demolish these sorts of lists.
Yeah, I mean, any particular list is going to, there are rock, papers and scissors. Yes. You build a list, I can build a list that is designed specifically to take that out, and you should have a lot of difficulty. And it will be very hard,
and I will lose. But not that we need specific lists to beat me on the tabletop,
Well, we'll find out about that.
Yeah, we'll have a crack at some point again. Edward Vincent asks, will Fortress Europe include any Europe-specific gaming scenarios, or will that be covered in late war rulebooks?
Late war, like the D-Day books and so forth, have at the end of them a campaign that has some new missions and ties them together in a little narrative campaign or a little ordered campaign where you play this, and this, with each having a bit of extra effect on it. And there are rules for things like amphibious landings and airborne assaults and so forth in there. So that sort of thing is coming, but once again, this isn't the book for it. It's coming in the D-Day books.
And as part of the D-Day releases, we do have special order landing craft and bunkers, I believe, that you can hook up for when you get your D-Day book. So that's something else to look forward to.
Yep, should make some good-looking assault games.
It should be, yeah.
Assaults,
I'm actually pretty keen to have a play with them. I was looking at them yesterday. They're great. Nathaniel Duncan, what is your favourite change from Late War v 3.5 to Late War v4 proper?
Well, I'd have to say two of them.
Uh-huh.
The first is that instead of having to remember to change over stuff and so forth, this is V4. Your V4 rulebook works just right with this. So instead of having to fiddle around with converting your artillery ratings and converting this and remembering this is slightly different and blah, 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 it's V4. The second thing is that it's been rebalanced. Equipment's been updated based on better information, better models, better mathematical models, and it's just, it's just all around just a little better in my opinion.
Bit
slicker, but also just a better sort of model of World War II than it was before.
All right. And now we're moving on to the section that you've titled here on the question list, What's In, What's Out, which I think is potentially what everyone is looking forward to the most. So, Andrew McCaslin is asking whether this covers anything from D-Day or anything from Road to Rome, and Brent DeVos is piggybacking on that question and wants to know if there's any information on the Sicily campaign in this book.
Okay, this book doesn't have a lot of background. It's got history at the beginning, so pretty much the same history as you've seen before, but it's expanded out to cover to the end of the war. But other than that, it isn't a background book. And it doesn't have any specific forces for any specific thing. So yes, you could. Sicily is a bit of a crossover. Operation Husky, it's in 43. You might find mid-war better to model that, I would expect, especially since the Germans there are more Iron Cross than Ghost Panzers, so this stuff's a bit late for it. But Italy in 1944, late 43, 44, this book is a good place to go, probably better than the D-Day books.
Right, yes.
But this doesn't cover D-Day so well. So the Americans in here, for instance, are still using the old reconnaissance gear and the T-30 half-tracked howitzer and so forth. They haven't moved forward into the new 1944 equipment. So this is still using your mid-war equipment as they were using in Italy, rather than the D-Day stuff, which obviously is what the D-Day book is about.
So with a little imagination and the right basing, I can easily run sort of Italian battles for this. All right, fantastic. Everyone asks, are M8 Scots, 76mm Shermans, IS-2s, ISUs, KV-85 Hetzers and King Tigers, Panzer 470s, Sturm Tigers, Cromwells and Challengers, Typhoons, P-47s, Jumbo Shermans, EZ-8, Soviet M4 Shermans, or M18 tank destroyers included in this book?
The short answer is no.
No.
This book isn't about new stuff. This book is just about carrying forward what we've got and getting people ready for the new books that are going to come out with the new releases.
And those new releases will include, if I'm not mistaken, M8 Scots, 76mm Shermans, IS-2s, ISUs, KV-85s, Hetzers, King Tigers.
The whole list, yes.
There we go.
But not always in the first book.
Right.
So the Americans in D-Day, they have 76mm Shermans, M8 Scots, but they don't have EZ-8s and Jumbos, because they weren't in Normandy, they weren't at D-Day. So you'll have to wait for a next American book to get that. Which, depending on your viewpoint, if you want everything now, that may be a bad thing. But if you actually like having something to look forward to, in a progression in this late war journey where you get to try out this stuff and then add some more stuff and then add some more stuff, then it's a good thing.
Well, that's the whole idea, is that we've set it out to track the course of the late war from Fortress Europe through
Yeah.
to the end. So
Yeah.
you'll be getting there. You'll be getting the bits as they show up in the theatres.
Yeah, in a way, it's sort of like a campaign where you get to experience the war as it develops. So you start with what they had in Normandy, and you get to go, well, that's good, that's bad. I wish I had some of the stuff that there are rumours of coming, sort of thing. Just like the troops at the time were. Then you get the bulge book and get some new kit, and wow, that's great, and so forth as you move through.
So it is about trying out the stuff that might get overlooked later.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
quite cool. Is letting every dog have his day
Yeah.
in the bocage or whatever, and then when I can get a bigger gun, I'll use a bigger gun. But for now, it'll do.
Yep, and also trying to keep the stuff that hung around balanced. One of the goals is to try and make, the basic M4 Sherman ran right through the war, and I'd like to see players right at the end of the war still wanting to field the basic M4 Sherman. And for instance, it's got several advantages over the 76, not the least of the fact that it's a better HE gun and it's cheaper. If you're not expecting to face too many tanks, then it's better at beating up infantry.
Right.
And so you probably want a nice balance of the two, depending on what you're expecting to face.
All right. So moving on, can I field any colonial or minority troops from any side? Asks Yaka Salonen.
Not in this book. As we said, this is just the basics. That sort of stuff will come from web things and future books and so forth.
And then I've got a collection of questions here that the answer to which will be not in this book, but I think it's a good opportunity to address a few things people are interested in. Are there any 21st Panzer Italians in late war, Hungarians, Romanians or Polish in this book? No. But what's the future look like for them?
They will be covered in some form somewhere in the future. All of those, they're great to have. I have a late war Romanian army, and I'd be a little annoyed if I can't eventually field it as Romanians. At the moment, it's going to be fielded as a German force. It'll work perfectly fine. But getting that extra Romanian flavour back into it will be something I look forward to.
So all of those things, or just keep an eye out for them, because this isn't for introducing highly specialist equipment or nationality.
This is just our opening bid.
Opening bid, fantastic. So Phil McPeak asks, have the exact composition of squad entries changed? Will I have to rebase anything?
If you've got an existing late war army, the answer is no, mostly, sort of.
Right.
Almost every case the answer is no. There are a couple of things we've changed, and it's mostly in the support weapon type things. And that's basically to make them work better and easier. So for instance, the Germans, their Panzerfausts, we've just split them out like American bazookas into individual small bases rather than basing them as pairs. On the other hand, for the Russians, we've tended to group things a little more.
Consolidate them a little more, yeah.
And if you played Mid-War Russians, you're already familiar with that, so nothing's really new there.
All right, so transitioning over, you'll be fine because everything's based. All right. Josh Kitchings asks, is there any reason for me to buy this if my late war army is a Cromwell tank company? Will I be able to play late war within the next year with said army?
Well, as a Desert Rats Armoured Squadron commander with a Cromwell force, the answer is yes to both. Now, there are no Cromwells in this book.
Right.
However, if you want to play your Cromwells for the next year, they are a little slower because they sort of move at the speed of Shermans and use cards that have funny looking Cromwells on them that remarkably look like Shermans, but you'll be able to use your force until you get the British book, at which point suddenly they'll speed up and points will change and so forth because they'll be Cromwells.
Cromwellian?
Yeah. But
Cromwellian? Cromwellian, I think we'll take.
Yep. So yeah, that's what I'll be doing with my Cromwells, just fielding them as a Sherman Armoured Squadron until we get the new book.
And that's February, so...
Yeah, it's not too far away.
Plenty of time to mess around with Sherman Cromwells and then get the real deal on the table, which will be nice. I haven't got any Cromwells. I don't think I could point a Cromwell out of a lineup.
It's a very square, boxy.
It's the
little
square
British
boxy one? All right,
Yeah.
sweet. Well, because I haven't ever done any late war stuff. I've only been here for mid war, so I haven't seen a Cromwell before.
Right.
You've got to consider me a brand new player who's never seen a Cromwell.
Cool.
Right.
Well, you'll enjoy those when you get your hands on some.
I hope so. I hope so.
Lovely beastie.
So my brand new Cromwell force that I'll be getting into for February can steamroll some Soviet Lees if I want to.
Yes.
In a battle that never happened.
Well,
It
of
never
course.
could have happened.
Obviously, the Germans have been defeated in 1943, and now
Operation
Unthinkable is
Yeah, here
happening
we
in
go.
44.
Here we go. Get at it. Make that yours. That'll be good. Daniel Zubok asks, sticking with the Soviets, what is the point difference between Hero and common T-34s in Fortress Europe?
In Fortress Europe, there's actually remarkably little difference in points between them, because the quality of the regular guys has come up to a degree. The heroes are still better, but they're just not quite as sort of gung-ho, to use a term.
Right.
So there's pluses and minuses here.
Okay, and continuing in the Soviets, finally, Robert Riley asks why the 4+ infantry save for Red Army Soviets, even though they are more expensive than the Hero version.
Well, I take it the more expensive than the Hero version's referring to the enemy at the gates thing, where the heroes were reluctant because they're the few survivors of the big units, and the Germans are still busy smashing everybody.
They've already seen enough stuff.
Yep, so that's why the points difference there, but really it's because those big units are very, very effective. They've got a 4+ save, but they've got their Ara, which means that they charge 6 inches, 15 centimeters. They've got a lot of other really high morale. And basically, if you can get them into an assault by turn 2 or 3, you can often win the game. If you haven't got them in an assault by turn 4, you've probably been slaughtered.
Right.
So if you're thinking of fielding a big Russian battalion, that's the most important thing to remember. Get them into an assault while there's still big units.
Right.
Then they're pretty much unstoppable. If you can't get them to an assault that fast, you're
Have
going
something
to
else
have,
to do the job?
well, it's pretty much going to be over. They're a very, very fast force.
Well, that's all
Win or
good.
lose quickly.
That's
they
nice.
are
You get
very, very scary when they're coming at you very fast, which they can do.
I think maybe for Bagration, I will do a big Soviet block, and that way I can get a lot of games in a night because I'll just cycle through losses. Boom, 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 boom.
That's one way.
4
Cycle
games
through
in.
wins.
Well,
Just
yeah, should do.
Steamroller.
But when I like to get as many losses in a night as I can. Ken Horton asks exactly what Shermans are in this book.
Well, I take it you're talking about American Shermans or maybe British ones, but basically the card says M4 Sherman. And by that we mean any M4 series Sherman.
Right, okay.
So most people are going to be using the M4A1 model that the Americans had for mid-war, or also the British for mid-war, but a British player can also use the M4A4 Sherman 5 model.
Right.
It doesn't matter, they're Shermans. If you've got older M4 straight models or M4A3 models or M4A2 model, it doesn't matter, they are Shermans. M4 Shermans or Shermans for the British. We don't distinguish them.
Right. And now we get to just ease into a nice series of questions about your creative process, or the creative process. Austin Coped wants to know what force was the hardest to get ready for publication?
Hardest to get ready for publication.
And I guess that's however you want to decide the hardest one was.
Yes.
I don't know if he means the one with the hardest to spell names, or because I mean I'm sure that's an option.
Panther tanks was one of them. T-34 tank battalions would be another.
Those are pretty key. Those are pretty key units too. It's not as if that you want to.
Yeah, I mean Panthers are an interesting one. We initially had a bit of space between the Panther and the Tiger because their front armour is the same. The Tiger's got much better side armour, much more determined crew, better top armour, better assaulty capabilities and so forth. But the Panther's faster, very, very similar gun. And so initially we spread them apart, and we actually had to bring the points of the tiger down, the panther up.
Right.
Because it turned out that the vulnerabilities of the panther weren't as great as we thought they were going to be.
Right.
And the advantages of the tigers, and it's one of those rock, paper, scissors. When a tiger is what you really need,
Yep.
if that's what the game is going to be won by tigers, then tigers are really, really good.
Yep.
But if not, then all those extras the tigers have really don't matter, and the panther comes up. And panther players can negate a lot of those disadvantages, but use their speed to gain other advantages. Yes, they're more vulnerable to being flanked by Shermans and so forth, and hence there is a points difference. And likewise, the T-34 is trying to get a new flavour for them.
Right.
Because this is 1944, whereas in 1942, a Soviet tank corps had a life expectancy of a month from Stalin saying, build me a new one, until Stalin said, build me a new one to replace that one. Took less than 2 months.
It's miserable.
But by Kursk, or after Kursk, they were still taking heavy casualties, but they weren't just getting completely blitzed, and they were starting to actually build some skill and experience, which is what the mid-war hero units are about. And then by 1944, late 43, 44, they were rebuilding these units,
Right.
throwing in new conscripts into the units, and so they had a better core of experience, and so trying to make them feel like they're not just the same stuff carried forward, and then trying to make the heroes feel a bit different as well.
Okay, and in keeping with that Soviet theme, why are the Soviets again at the back of the release schedule?
I think Adam Brooker answered that one on Facebook with keeping the best till last.
Right.
But somebody has to be, and being the 75th anniversary of D-Day, D-Day covers the 3 big armies that were there, whereas the Soviets, yes, migrations in the same month, but we had to pick a theme, and getting the Americans, Germans and British out in one go seemed to be a better pick.
I mean, we're an English-speaking company with a lot of familial history that relates to the western side of the campaign, so we're a little bit more emotionally connected to the whole D-Day thing. But we're not going to...
the Soviets here have got most of the Bagration stuff here anyway.
Yes.
It's just trying to service the most people
and we're
best.
We're not skimping on Bagration. It'll have its day in the sun. It will be a big deal.
It will indeed.
Yes. It might even convince me to do some Soviets.
I hope so.
Here's another question. What was the biggest lesson that you guys, that's the writing team, learned from the mid-war releases, and how are those lessons being incorporated into the late-war rollout?
Trying to get the timing to give players a quicker entry into the game and a better experience. So we've got Fortress Europe coming out day 0, followed a month later by the Americans with a big release stream coming with that. But while the American release stream's coming out, we've got a month later the Germans with a big release stream, and we've got not too far after that the British coming out, and so we're just trying to roll things through. And meanwhile, Fortress Europe gives everybody something to play in the meanwhile, so nobody's left out.
Right, perfect. Now looking to the future, Lee Loki Hancock wants to know, are you going to go back to mid-war and release the Axis minor allies and the SS?
Wayne would be really annoyed that the work he's doing at the moment sort of wasn't released if we didn't, so I'm pretty sure it's going to appear.
Right, perfect. And Sebastian Bovey, what would be the upcoming arming book Phil is looking forward to the most?
The next one.
D-Day American?
Well, no, the next one.
Literally, more ephemerally, the next one. Right, yes. The moment one is finished, it's looking to the future here.
Yes. D-Day British of the ones that are in the near future. As I said, I have a Cromwell Armoured Squadron. I have a Desert Rats Motor Company. My very first World War II army was a Cromwell force way back in late 70s, early 80s.
The late 70s.
Yep.
Using what models?
Old heroics from Ross 1300 scale stuff, playing WRG 1925 to 1950 rules. Back in the good old days.
There we go. That's a lovely note to end it on. Is there anything else you want to leave people with? Any thoughts?
No, just enjoy the journey through late war.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.